The aliens' first encounter with humanity. Vathor, a battle-hardened alien warrior from the planet Centaur, had never known fear. His race had traveled across the galaxy, conquering world after world, leaving no survivors in their wake. He was known throughout the cosmos as an unstoppable force, a warrior who thrived in chaos and destruction. Yet, as he sailed through the stars on a mission to discover new civilizations, he had no idea that his next encounter would shake him to his core. The vast expanse of space stretched out before him, endless and silent. Vathor's ship glided through the cosmos, its sleek, dark form barely visible against the backdrop of distant stars. For years, he had honed his skills in battle, and no enemy had ever been able to defeat him. However, Earth, this strange blue planet, was different. It was not a planet he had heard of before, and it held a curious magnetic pull that made him pause. Perhaps there was something here worth investigating. As Vathor's ship entered the Earth's atmosphere, he noticed how serene the planet appeared from above. Oceans stretched out like endless blue veins, and green landmasses dotted the surface. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. For a warrior like Vathor, this peacefulness felt like a trap, a calm before a storm. Yet he had heard whispers of this place, Earth, a planet of humans. And there was something about these humans that intrigued him. He decided to make contact. After all, no species had ever defeated him in battle, and he was curious to see how these humans compared. He landed his ship in a remote part of the world, far from the eyes of any civilization. The ship's engines powered down, and the hatch opened with a soft hiss. Vathor stepped out onto the Earth's soil, his black armor gleaming in the dim light. The air smelled unfamiliar, fresh, yet charged with an energy that he had never encountered before. He scanned his surroundings. There were no signs of human life, no cities, no bustling streets. The world seemed eerily quiet. Yet deep down he felt a strange pull, as if the planet was watching him. He was alone, but not truly alone. Vathor activated his communication device, sending out a signal to the humans, hoping for some form of response. His fingers hovered over the control panel, and for the first time, he felt an odd sense of anticipation. What would he find here? Would they be a challenge, or would they be easy prey, like so many others? After a few moments, a signal crackled through. "Who are you?" the voice asked, filled with suspicion. It was the first sign of life he had encountered since landing. The language was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakable. Humans were wary creatures, like any other species that had survived for long in a hostile universe. Vathor grinned beneath his helmet, his confidence returning. "I am Vathor," he said in a deep, booming voice. "I come in peace to learn about your species. We are travelers, explorers, and conquerors. Tell me about Earth." For a moment, there was silence. The voice on the other end seemed to hesitate. "You're not from around here," the voice said, a hint of concern creeping into the words. "Why are you here?" Vathor's eyes narrowed, and he felt a strange sense of discomfort creeping in. These humans were suspicious. Most species would have trembled at the sight of an alien of his size and strength. But these humans, they were different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about them made him uneasy. He decided to push forward. "I am here to understand," he repeated. "Your world is unlike any I've seen. Show me your cities. Tell me about your people." There was a long pause before the voice responded. "You're not ready for that." Vathor's heart skipped a beat. Ready? What did that mean? He was a veteran warrior, ready for anything. He had faced armies and survived battles across the galaxy. Nothing had ever made him feel unprepared. Yet there was something in the tone of the human's voice that made him question his certainty. "I am ready," Vathor insisted, his voice growing firmer. "Let me see what you are capable of." The response came swiftly. "If you want to understand, you'll have to listen. You won't understand us by looking at our cities or our technology. You'll need to understand our history." Vathor tilted his head, intrigued. "History? Yes, the things we've done, the wars we've fought, the sacrifices we've made. Those are the stories you need to hear if you want to understand who we are. Vathor stood still, the weight of the human's words hanging in the air. He had traveled across the galaxy, seeking knowledge, seeking strength. But now he felt something new. Curiosity. He had always believed that strength was the key to survival, that those who could conquer would rule. But this, the mention of history, of wars, of sacrifices, it was a challenge he hadn't expected. The human's voice crackled again. You may regret it, but if you truly want to understand us, listen. We will show you our past. It's the only way to understand the truth of who we are. With a deep breath, Vathor nodded. He had come here looking for power, but now he found himself looking for answers. Little did he know, the truth that would be revealed about humanity's wars would change everything. He thought he knew about strength, survival, and the true power of Earth. And thus began his journey into the heart of humanity's darkest and most powerful secrets. The very secrets that would freeze even the bravest of warriors in their tracks. Vathor stood alone on Earth, his mind racing after the cryptic words from the human. You will regret it, they had said. Listen to our past, and you'll understand. It was a strange request, one that both challenged and intrigued him. He was a warrior, hardened by countless battles and victories, but something about the way the human had spoken shook him to his core. His armor gleamed under the Earth's sun, reflecting the strange blue sky above. He had never encountered anything like this planet, or these people. Most species, when faced with an alien of his power, would have cowered in fear, but humans were different. They had faced their own wars, their own battles, yet they were not afraid to speak to him with a mix of suspicion and something else, something deeper. Vathor activated his communication device again, his mind still trying to process what had just happened. The human had mentioned war. Of course, he had encountered countless alien civilizations that had been destroyed by wars. What made these humans so different? What could their history possibly hold that would make them worthy of such a dire warning? The voice crackled through the device once more. You've asked for our story. Now you'll hear it. Vathor's heart raced as he listened, unsure of what to expect. The human's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that suggested they were not sharing something lightly. Our wars, the human began, have shaped us. Every battle, every conflict has left its mark. Some wars were fought for land, others for resources. But the wars we speak of now, they were different. They were wars that tested the very soul of our species. Vathor's mind whirred as the words echoed in his helmet. Wars that tested the soul. It was an alien concept to him. He had fought for power, for conquest, for victory, but never had a war tested his soul. These wars were not fought with traditional weapons. The voice continued. They were fought with something far darker. The darkest parts of human nature. We fought wars that tore apart our own planet, destroying entire civilizations. We fought wars that pitted us against each other, and in the end, we almost destroyed ourselves. Vathor's grip tightened on his weapon as he listened. His mind struggled to process what he was hearing. How could a species survive wars so devastating? How could they even function after such destruction? But despite the chaos, the human continued. Something happened. A change. A new kind of strength was born from our darkest moments. We learned to fight not just for victory, but for survival. And in our darkest hours, we found something that no one expected. Hope. Vathor felt a chill run through his spine. Hope. How could hope arise from the ashes of such destruction? It was a question he had never considered. He had always believed that strength was the key to survival, that power came from dominating others. But here were humans, talking about hope in the aftermath of their wars. Hope wasn't something we were born with, the human's voice said softly. It was something we had to fight for. In the end, it was the wars we fought within ourselves that gave us the strength to rebuild. Vathor's mind began to spin as the truth of what the human was saying began to settle in. He had never encountered a species so deeply affected by their own wars, a species that not only survived the devastation, but emerged stronger because of it. The idea was foreign to him, yet there was something undeniably powerful about it. But then, the human's tone shifted, growing more somber. "You see, the real truth is that we fought a war against ourselves," the voice said. "And in that war, we learned that we had the power to change. But it came at a price. We lost everything. And for many of us, the scars of those wars still haunt us." Vathor felt a sudden weight on his chest. What kind of war could leave a species scarred like this? The very thought of it unnerved him. He had always fought battles to gain more, to conquer. But these humans, they had fought wars that had taken away everything they had known. The voice fell silent for a moment before continuing. "And that's where you come in. You, Vathor. You wanted to know what made us different. Well, now you know. We're not just warriors. We're survivors. And that's something no other species in the galaxy can claim. Because we don't just fight for victory. We fight to make sure we never lose ourselves again." Vathor stood frozen, his mind unable to fully comprehend what he had just heard. He had come to Earth seeking a new challenge, expecting to face a species like any other. But the humans were different. They had fought wars not just with weapons, but with their very souls. They had endured unimaginable loss, and yet they had risen from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever. For the first time in his life, Vathor felt a fear he had never known before. Not the fear of battle, not the fear of death, but the fear of understanding. The fear of realizing that there was something greater than strength, something more powerful than domination. The human's voice crackled through again. "You wanted to understand us. Now you do. But the question is, can you handle the truth?" Vathor stood still, his breath heavy behind his mask. The realization hit him hard. The truth was more terrifying than any enemy he had ever faced. And for the first time in his life, Vathor wondered if he was truly ready to face it. Vathor's mind raced as the human's words echoed in his ears. The truth they had shared was a shock to his system, something his alien mind struggled to comprehend. He had witnessed countless worlds rise and fall, civilizations crumble under the weight of conflict, but none had ever spoken of war the way these humans did. The weight of what he had just learned pressed heavily on his chest. Humanity wasn't simply a species of warriors, as he had assumed. They were survivors, survivors who had endured wars that had torn them apart, and yet in the end they had emerged stronger. But it was more than just strength. It was something else, something deeper. It was the understanding that war wasn't merely about victory. It was about survival. And perhaps, more importantly, the survival of one's humanity. Vathor stood motionless, his armor reflecting the dim light of the room. The hum of his ship was barely audible in the background. He had always been taught that power and strength were the ultimate goals of any civilization. But now, in the face of humanity's history, those ideals seemed empty. What had he known of true power? What did victory mean when the cost was your very soul? The human's voice continued, almost as if sensing Vathor's confusion. "You see, Vathor, it wasn't just about defeating our enemies. It wasn't just about conquering lands or resources. It was about maintaining our sense of self. We had to fight not only external enemies, but the demons within us." Vathor's fingers clenched around the grip of his weapon, the weight of it grounding him in reality. He could hear the human's words, but he couldn't fully process them. What were these humans truly capable of? He had underestimated them. And now, he was beginning to see just how dangerous that could be. "You asked why our history is so different," the voice continued. "It's because we learned that survival wasn't just about defeating the other side. It was about never losing ourselves in the process. Every war we fought, the wars against other civilizations, the wars against ourselves, taught us something valuable. It taught us that victory isn't the end. It's the beginning of something new. And the price of that victory was often everything." Vathor shuddered beneath his armor. He could feel the intensity of the human's words even through the cold, metallic exterior. He had seen countless species fall to war, their bodies littering the ground, their civilizations obliterated. But these humans, these survivors, had endured wars that had reached into their very souls. They had fought wars not just with weapons but with their inner darkness, their hopes, and their fears. Vathor couldn't help but think back to the many conquests he had led, the many battles he had fought for glory, for power. He had always believed that the strongest would reign supreme, that victory was the ultimate goal. But these humans had fought battles that transcended mere physical conflict. They had faced themselves, their own darkest urges, and had emerged victorious, not just over their enemies, but over their own nature. And now, standing on Earth, Vathor felt the weight of their words. The fear that had gripped him earlier was no longer about the humans themselves. It was about what he had learned, what he had seen, what humanity had become in the face of such horrors. He could feel the walls of his own certainty crumbling. For the first time in his life, Vathor wasn't sure of anything. His own sense of self, his identity as a warrior, was called into question. What did it mean to be a warrior if your battles were not about power and conquest, but about survival and the preservation of humanity's very essence? The human's voice returned, more somber this time. You may have fought wars, Vathor, but you've never fought a war like ours. Ours weren't fought to conquer others. They were fought to conquer the parts of ourselves we feared the most, the darkest parts. And sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we face within. Vathor closed his eyes, his mind racing. He had thought he understood the nature of war, its power, its glory, its finality. But now he was faced with a new truth, one that terrified him more than any opponent ever could. These humans had fought wars not only to survive, but to preserve the very thing that made them human. And in doing so, they had paid a price that no alien species could fathom. He opened his eyes again, his gaze locking on the human before him. The figure seemed small and fragile compared to his towering presence, but there was something about the human that commanded respect. The fear that had gripped him was no longer from the alien's appearance, but from what they had shared. Vathor was no longer sure if he was the one in control of the situation. The human's words hit him like a blow. The question, Vathor, is not whether you can defeat us. It's whether you can truly understand us. Can you comprehend what it means to fight for something greater than power? Can you understand what it means to fight for something that transcends all the glory you've ever known? The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. Vathor stood, paralyzed by the terrifying realization that the humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors in a way he could never have imagined. And the war they fought was not one he could ever win, because it was a war fought within the very essence of their being. The truth of humanity's past was more terrifying than any battlefield Vathor had ever faced. And for the first time in his life, he realized that the real battle had only just begun. The words of the human had left Vathor speechless, frozen in a way he had never experienced before. The towering alien warrior stood at the center of the room, his body still, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The air around him seemed to thicken, and the weight of the revelation about humanity's past hung like a heavy shroud over him. He had encountered countless species throughout the galaxy, warrior races, peaceful civilizations, and everything in between. But he had never encountered anything like this. Humans were different. The depths of their history, their ability to survive wars so brutal and merciless, left him questioning the very core of his existence. How could a species endure such trials and still retain their humanity? How could they fight wars that weren't about power or dominance, but for survival against their own darkness? Vathor had always prided himself on his strength and his tactical mind. His alien species had conquered planets, established empires, and crushed rebellions without hesitation. Victory was everything to them, and they had fought countless battles with the sole aim of gaining more power. But now, in the presence of the human's words, his understanding of what constituted a warrior was shattered. The human had spoken of wars that didn't just ravage lands, but destroyed the very spirit of their people. They had fought wars not against invaders or outside threats, but against their own instincts, their own fears and inner demons. These battles were not about defeating enemies. They were about holding on to something greater, the essence of what made them human. Vathor's mind raced. The more he tried to process the human's words, the more his thoughts became entangled. The fear that had begun to creep into his heart grew stronger, and it was a fear that went beyond mere survival. It was the realization that he had never truly understood what it meant to fight for something more than just power. The human had spoken with such quiet confidence, as if the weight of humanity's history was nothing more than a painful truth they had learned to live with. But to Vathor, it was an overwhelming revelation. It was a truth that cut deeper than any wound he had ever suffered, one that challenged everything he believed about strength and conquest. The humans had endured wars that transcended mere conflict. They had fought wars for survival, yes, but more than that, they had fought for the preservation of their very souls. Vathor's thoughts turned to the wars he had fought in, the countless planets his species had destroyed in their relentless pursuit of power. He had never once stopped to question the cost of such victories. To him, the end justified the means, and strength was measured by the ability to crush and conquer. But now, as he reflected on the stories the human had shared, he realized how hollow those victories were. What had they truly accomplished? How could they have conquered so many worlds only to find that their strength had never been enough to understand what it truly meant to fight for something worth protecting? The human had told him that their wars were not fought for power, but for something far more profound, something that Vathor couldn't quite grasp. Was it their will to survive? Was it their desire to keep their humanity intact, even in the face of destruction? The alien's mind began to unravel as he grappled with this new understanding, and in that moment, he felt something he had never felt before: doubt. The human's words echoed once more in his mind. The hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. Vathor was no stranger to internal conflict. He had experienced doubt in the past, particularly in moments of uncertainty during battle. But this was different. This was not a fleeting moment of hesitation. It was a deep, gnawing sense that his entire existence as a warrior was based on a flawed understanding of what it meant to truly fight. He had been raised to believe that strength came from domination, that power was the ultimate goal. But now, standing here, surrounded by humans who had fought battles not to conquer, but to hold on to their own souls, Vathor wondered if there was a higher purpose to war. Was there more to strength than just victory? Could it be that true strength lay in the ability to endure, to overcome not just enemies, but the darkest parts of oneself? Vathor struggled to find his words. He had never been one for hesitation, but now, the very act of speaking seemed to betray him. How could he ask the human any more questions when he himself was so uncertain? How could he challenge the very idea of war and strength when everything he had believed in was unraveling before his eyes? The human, sensing the alien's inner turmoil, spoke again, softer this time. "I know this is hard for you to understand, Vathor. Your people don't fight the same battles we do. You've never been forced to question your motives the way we have." The alien slowly turned his head, his eyes locking with the human's. In that moment, he saw something that pierced through the uncertainty and the fear. The human was not speaking out of arrogance or superiority. There was no gloating, no mockery. There was only an unspoken understanding, a recognition of the shared weight of history that they both carried. The room was silent as Vathor stood motionless, grappling with the enormity of what he had just learned. His hands, which had once been steady and unyielding, now trembled ever so slightly. He felt as if the very foundation of his identity was crumbling. The realization hit him hard. He was no longer just facing an enemy. He was facing the terrifying truth about himself, about his own purpose. Vathor's mind was paralyzed by the weight of it all. He was a warrior, a conqueror. But now, in the face of humanity's wars, he understood that his understanding of what it meant to be a warrior was dangerously incomplete. And for the first time in his life, Vathor wondered, was he truly strong, or had he simply never been tested in the ways that truly mattered? Vathor remained motionless, struggling to comprehend the depths of what he had just learned. His mind, once razor-sharp and unyielding, was clouded by the weight of humanity's wars, their stories of survival and sacrifice. The stories shared by the human echoed in his thoughts like a constant drumbeat, each tale more haunting than the last. His species had never fought wars like these, wars that tested the very soul, not just the body. Wars that didn't seek power or conquest, but survival in its most raw and desperate form. The humans' words were not just a lesson about their species. They were a challenge to everything Vathor had believed about warfare, strength, and victory. Humanity had faced wars that tore their very societies apart, yet somehow they had emerged from the ashes not just alive, but more human than ever. The truth was chilling. How could a species endure such darkness and still remain human? How could they survive battles fought not with weapons alone, but with the soul itself? Vathor had always been taught that victory was the ultimate goal, that conquering was the true test of a warrior's strength. But now he felt as if the ground beneath his feet was shifting. He could no longer hold on to that simplistic view of war. The more he thought about the human stories, the more he realized how hollow his own victories had been. His battles had been won with strategy, with weapons, and with brute force. But those victories had never tested the limits of his spirit, never forced him to confront the darkest parts of himself. He glanced over at the human, who seemed calm in the face of Vathor's inner turmoil. The human wasn't gloating or looking for answers. He was simply sharing the truth of their history, of the struggles that had shaped their species into what it was. There was no arrogance in the human's voice, no pride in the recounting of humanity's battles. There was only a deep, quiet understanding of what it meant to fight for survival, and the cost of that fight. As Vathor listened, his thoughts swirled with confusion. How could a species fight battles for so long without succumbing to despair? How could they wage wars that destroyed not just cities, but entire generations, and still hold on to their humanity? Vathor had never known a war like that. His people fought wars to conquer, to expand their empire, and to crush their enemies. But humanity's wars were different. They fought wars that seemed to have no clear enemy, no clear victor. They fought wars against their own nature, wars that threatened to consume them from within. The human spoke again, breaking Vathor's reverie. We don't fight because we want to. We fight because we have to protect what matters most: our families, our homes, our way of life. But more than that, we fight to protect our humanity. Even when it feels like the world is falling apart, even when we don't know if we'll survive another day, we keep fighting. Because that's what makes us human. Vathor's chest tightened at the words. He had always prided himself on his people's ability to fight for power, to overcome every obstacle. But now he began to understand that true strength wasn't about overcoming enemies. True strength was about overcoming yourself, your own doubts, your own fears. Humanity's wars had been brutal, but they had also been a test of something much deeper than physical endurance. The alien's mind raced as he tried to process what the human had just shared. In the quiet of the room, the weight of the stories seemed to settle heavily on his shoulders. How could a species endure such suffering and still find the strength to fight? How could they rise from the ashes of their own destruction and rebuild time and time again? It was a question Vathor couldn't answer. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that perhaps he didn't need to answer it at all. Perhaps the answer lay in the struggle itself, the unyielding will to survive, to preserve something greater than just physical strength. Vathor was beginning to feel a profound sense of respect for humanity that he hadn't expected. His people had always believed they were the pinnacle of strength, the ultimate warriors of the galaxy. But now, in the presence of these humans, he realized just how much he still had to learn. They weren't just warriors, they were survivors. And their true strength lay not in their ability to conquer, but in their ability to endure. The room was silent for a moment as Vathor processed the enormity of this truth. He could feel a strange sense of unease creeping over him. The fear he had felt earlier had not abated. If anything, it had intensified. Vathor, the mighty conqueror, had never once considered that true power might not lie in destruction, but in the ability to withstand it. His thoughts turned to his own people. How many wars had they fought, conquering world after world, subjugating species without a second thought? They had never questioned the righteousness of their cause. And now, standing in front of this human, Vathor realized how misguided his people's understanding of war had been. He turned his gaze back to the human. "How do you do it?" Vathor's voice was almost a whisper. "How do you keep fighting when it feels like there's no hope left? When everything around you is crumbling, and you're not sure if you'll survive another battle?" The human's eyes softened, and for the first time, Vathor saw a glimmer of something that transcended battle strategy and tactics. "We fight because we have something worth protecting. It's not just about survival. It's about our humanity. And that's what makes us strong." Vathor stood in stunned silence. He had thought strength was about overpowering others, crushing them beneath his feet. But now he saw that true strength was about holding on to what made you who you were, even when the world tried to take it away. The room felt colder now, and Vathor's mind was clearer than it had ever been. In the face of humanity's wars, he realized just how little he had understood about the true nature of strength, and for the first time in his life, Vathor felt the weight of that truth. He was no longer sure if he was the conqueror he had always believed himself to be. Instead, he began to wonder if humanity's strength lay in their ability to survive, and if that was a strength far greater than any he had ever known. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts. Vathor could feel his own mind processing the information, the weight of humanity's struggles pressing down on him in a way that no war, no battle ever had. It was like a wall of realization had suddenly crashed down upon him, and there was no escaping it. The stories of human wars had done something to him, something that he wasn't sure he understood. Vathor had never thought much of other species, particularly humans. To him, they had always been a lesser species, fragile, small, and prone to destruction. In the galaxy, his people were known as the Supreme Conquerors. They were the ones who had dominated others, who had crushed any resistance that dared challenge them. But what he had just heard, that wasn't conquest. That wasn't war in the way he knew it. The human's voice cut through his swirling thoughts. "You're not the first alien to hear our stories, but you're the first to listen," the human said, almost as if speaking to himself. "Most others hear about what we've done and assume it's just brutality. But there's more to it than that. We fight to survive. We fight to protect the things that matter, even when it seems like we have nothing left." Vathor stared at the human, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of their words was too much for him to bear. They were simple words, yet they carried the power of generations of suffering, of sacrifice, of survival against impossible odds. Vathor had always measured power in terms of strength, weapons, and dominance. But what the human was describing, it was a different kind of power. A power born from pain, from loss, and from an undying will to keep going no matter what. Vathor's thoughts turned inward. Was this why he felt so uneasy? Was this why his mind had frozen when he heard the human stories? He had never once thought about the cost of war in terms of the soul, of the psychological toll it took. His wars had been about defeating enemies and claiming victory. But in the wars the humans had fought, it seemed the battle had never been just with other species, it had been with themselves. And this made Vathor question everything. Could it be that humanity's strength was not just in how they fought, but in what they fought for? Was their true power not in domination, but in the resilience of their spirit? Vathor had been taught that true warriors never showed weakness. His people never displayed fear. They crushed anything that stood in their way. But now, looking at the human, he felt a deep sense of respect, a respect that was both foreign and unsettling. How could a species so small, so vulnerable, endure such unimaginable suffering, and still hold on to their humanity. As the human's voice continued, recounting more tales of pain and triumph, Vathor couldn't help but feel a shift in his perception. The image he had had of humanity as weak, fragile creatures was beginning to crumble. These weren't just survivors. They were warriors in the truest sense of the word. Not because they had superior weapons or tactics, but because they had the courage to fight even when they knew the odds were stacked against them. The more he listened, the more he understood. He wasn't just hearing stories. He was learning the very essence of what it meant to be human. "They keep fighting because they don't give up," the human said quietly, looking at Vathor with eyes that seemed to see straight through him. "No matter how dark it gets, no matter how many times they've lost, they always find a reason to keep going. It's not about being the strongest. It's about having the will to keep fighting." Vathor's mind raced. He had never been forced to confront these questions, not in such a raw, unfiltered way. His entire worldview had been based on domination, on the idea that strength came from overpowering others. But what if true strength wasn't about taking control? It was about holding on to what you believed in, even when everything around you seemed to be falling apart. His heart pounded faster now, not in fear, but in awe. Could it be that the thing he feared most, the thing that had frozen him in place, wasn't just the power of humanity's wars? Could it be the realization that, in many ways, their strength far surpassed his own? "I've seen warriors in my lifetime," Vathor, the human, continued, "but I've never seen anyone like you. You're terrified of something, aren't you?" The question struck Vathor like a blow. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the words caught in his throat. There was no denying it. He was terrified, but it wasn't the fear of being defeated. It wasn't the fear of losing a battle. It was something deeper, something far more unsettling. It was the fear that he, the great conqueror, might be wrong about everything he had believed to be true. Vathor swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know what to think anymore," he said, his voice barely audible. "I thought I understood war. I thought I understood strength. But what you've shown me, it's not what I expected. And it scares me." The human didn't smile or look triumphant. Instead, he nodded in understanding. "It's not easy, seeing the world through a different lens," he said. "But maybe that's what it means to truly be strong. To question everything you thought you knew and still keep going." For the first time, Vathor realized that the fear he felt wasn't a weakness. It was the first step towards something greater, something he had never considered before. He had always believed that strength was about conquering others. But perhaps true strength was about conquering the self, the internal struggle. And in that moment, Vathor knew that he had just begun the hardest battle of all, the battle to understand humanity's true strength. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to learn. As Vathor stood in the room, he felt a strange weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in his life, the certainty that had once been the core of his being was now in question. The battlefield, the great galactic wars where his people had reigned supreme. Those things seemed distant now, as if they belonged to another time, another life. The human's voice continued to echo in his mind, each word chiseling away at his preconceptions. "It's not about being the strongest," the human had said. "It's about having the will to keep fighting." The words clung to Vathor like a heavy cloak. He had never truly understood what it meant to fight for something more than just victory. He had always fought to win, to assert dominance. But the humans, they fought for survival, for their families, for their future. And even when they lost, they'd fought again. The realization struck him with such force that it was as if the room itself had shifted. His heart began to race, not with fear, but with something much more profound, a feeling he had never thought possible. It was awe, and it was terrifying. He had always seen humanity as fragile, weak. But now, standing there, staring into the eyes of the human before him, he saw something completely different. He saw resilience. He saw a burning drive to endure, no matter the cost. In the stories of human wars, He saw not just death and destruction, but a relentless will to survive. And it was this very will, this tenacity, that sent a chill through his body. Vathor's mind flashed back to the first battle he had ever fought, a battle that had earned him his place among his people's elite warriors. It had been brutal. He had never seen anything like it, but that had been nothing compared to the wars the humans had fought. The battles they waged were not about conquest or dominance. They were about survival, about fighting for every inch of land, every breath of life, even when the odds were stacked against them. And suddenly, it clicked. The fear Vathor had felt earlier, an emotion so alien to him, wasn't born from weakness. It was born from admiration, from the realization that despite their lack of advanced weaponry, despite their vulnerability, humanity was capable of strength that his people could never truly understand. They weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting for something much bigger. They were fighting for each other. Vathor's mind raced, his thoughts spinning faster than ever. The war stories he had heard haunted him. The way humans had faced devastation and still found the courage to rise again. The way they had been pushed to the brink of extinction, but had refused to give up. There was a brutal beauty to their struggle, a purity that his people had never known. As the human continued, Vathor could barely hear the words anymore. His mind was too busy processing everything, analyzing everything he had learned about humanity. His people had conquered galaxies. They had crushed species beneath their feet. But what had they really accomplished? Power, control. Yes, but at what cost? Humanity's wars had been fought not just with weapons, but with heart. They fought for ideals, for freedom, for family. They fought for the right to exist, to thrive, to be. Suddenly, Vathor felt the weight of his own existence, the burden of his people's history, pressing down on him like a mountain. His kind had never fought for something as simple as survival. They had fought to control, to dominate, to crush. But in doing so, they had lost sight of what it meant to be alive, to fight for something greater than themselves. And now, standing face to face with a human who had lived through wars he could barely comprehend, Vathor realized the truth. His people might have been the most powerful warriors in the galaxy, but they had never understood what it truly meant to be strong. True strength, Vathor now understood, wasn't just about power or victory. It was about resilience, about the ability to face unimaginable odds and still keep going. It was about fighting, not just for the self, but for others. It was about never giving up, even when there was no reason left to keep going. And as the human finally fell silent, Vathor took a deep breath. He had spent his life conquering others, but now, for the first time, he realized the true battle had always been within himself. He had come to Earth expecting to find weakness, to find something his people could dominate. But instead, he had found something far more dangerous, humanity's unbreakable will. Vathor bowed his head, a gesture of respect he had never considered before. He wasn't just a conqueror anymore. He was a student, learning from the very people he had once looked down upon. For the first time in his life, Vathor understood the true meaning of strength, and he knew that, in this moment, he had become something entirely different, something that would forever change the course of his people's history.